Great, good morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Growing North Carolina's Workforce, Apprenticeships for Youth and Young Adults. My name is Rachel Crofa. I'm Senior Communications Manager at JFF Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, and I'll be your host today. Would also like to thank our co-host, ApprenticeshipNC. So great. Excited to have you all here. To get us started, I'm going to move it over to my colleague, Jonathan. So good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Rachel. Thank you so much. My name is Jonathan Payne. I am a Senior Program Manager for JFF's Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. And I'm really excited to be joined by my co-facilitator this morning, Andrea Messing-Mathy, who will have an opportunity to introduce herself a little bit later, unless, Andrea, you want to do it right now?
Just good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here.
We're also joined by our JFF events team, and a huge thanks to them. You know, the event today includes apprenticeship experts from North Carolina and beyond, and we're really excited for the opportunity that this actually presents for North Carolina. A special thanks goes out as well to our colleagues at New America and the work that we're doing together as part of the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. This webinar is also supported by generous funding from the Department of Labor as part of our Youth Apprenticeship Intermediaries contract. We have a very full agenda today, and that will hopefully highlight the importance of youth apprenticeship and apprenticeship for young adults, and also to move from theory from broad-based theory into regional action. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce you Elizabeth Standaffer, statewide Youth Apprenticeship Manager at ApprenticeshipNC. Elizabeth?
Good morning, and thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to JFF and our partners who have graciously given us their time today for this event. I am Elizabeth Standaffer, Youth Apprenticeship Manager for ApprenticeshipNC, and we appreciate you sharing your time with us today as we explore together growing North Carolina's workforce through apprenticeship for youth and young adults. Today, we will focus on the impact of regional collaboration in scaling apprenticeship opportunities and you, because as in your role, no matter what sector you represent, you are critical to the mission of growing youth apprenticeship across North Carolina. North Carolina is a proud partner of the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, or PAYA, and one of 9 original grant recipients across the country.
Okay, let me call you back.
As such, we have formed a core team of North Carolina practitioners called NC-PAYA that develop strategic initiatives to advance youth apprenticeship through networks of best practice that can be shared and replicated across the state. So congratulations. Today, you are part of North Carolina PAYA's inaugural statewide accelerator event with JFF. And we hope that the information you hear today will support your work as you go into your region. Now I would like to introduce Eric Sells now to kick off our event, Senior Advisor at JFF.
Good morning, Elizabeth, and thank you so much. I'll assume that I'm coming in loud and clear, and if I'm not, you will let me know. Thanks so much for getting us started today, and thanks so much to the good folks at North Carolina, Apprenticeship North Carolina, Community College System of North Carolina, workforce boards, partners, colleges. This is a great group of people that we have on the phone, just the sort of thing we think that you need to begin, I dare say, a movement in youth apprenticeships, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we get started too much, I've got all sorts of things to say, and I'm going to warn you right now, Jonathan, you're probably going to have to give me the hook in a 2-minute warning because I'm about to introduce Roger Collins, and nobody likes talking about apprenticeship more than me except for Roger Collins. Joining me today is Roger Collins. He's the Apprenticeship Manager, Deputy Administrator of the Apprenticeship Program at Siemens Energy. Roger's been a long-time partner to a lot of different folks in apprenticeship, and dare I say, a national leader. First met Roger when I was at the Department of Labor, and have seen him continue to do that great work in North Carolina. And I should say, you know, I was down to the summit y'all had in North Carolina about almost 2 years ago, Catherine? And I was just amazed at the turnout and the interest then and the continued turnout. And it was from industry, it was from career and technical education, it was from workforce boards, from the disability community. So a lot of real opportunity going on in North Carolina when we compare you with some other states. Roger, welcome today. I'm going to go over a couple of quick slides to set the stage, and then I got some burning questions for you.
Very good. Thank you, Eric.
All right. So this slide needs to be updated, but the long and short of it, in the last, since this major U.S. transformation on apprenticeship has happened starting in 2014, when then President Obama put out a goal in the State of the Union to double and diversify apprenticeships. And since then, there's been almost $1 billion in federal investment. A lot of that driven by bipartisan budget approvals and appropriations in Congress. Apprenticeship truly is a bipartisan issue. They quibble about little things, and we'll talk about that later. But the long and short of it is, the apprenticeship system since 2016 has gotten over $490 million in an appropriation, and this year I think it's proposed to be $175 million more, something like that. Anyway, there's a lot of investment going on. DOL's been funding it. DOL's been funding states, money in the game, doing activities. So there's a lot of continued interest in apprenticeship, and it's actually, according to DOL stats, it's well over 700,000 new apprenticeships in the last couple of years. Next slide, please. Just general point, you know, this slide used to say the labor market is tightening, yet blah, blah, blah. Labor market was tightening until COVID hit. We cannot have a conversation about apprenticeship, particularly youth apprenticeship, unless we have sort of COVID in our minds and how we use apprenticeship to maintain and sustain the progress we've had the last few years and how we keep it going during this challenging time in the labor market. So, you know, now's the time you need to be making partnerships, talking to employers, bringing your local partnerships together and plan for recovery. We know that post-secondary education isn't getting any cheaper, and folks need an alternative to that. But as my former boss used to say, you know, apprenticeship is the other college except without the debt. There are rapid changes in technology in the workforce. It continues to both impact employers and workers. Our nation struggles and really has struggled since I've been in workforce the last 40 years with a deep misalignment between what the workforce needs and how young people are prepared for careers. Again, a deep misalignment. We all go to our local meetings at the workforce board, at the chamber, with industry association, industry group. This conversation keeps coming up, has been for 30 or 40 years since I've been at them. We're not really aligned with our education and training system with what employer needs. Some places we do that very well, and we're going to hear about some of them today in North Carolina. We believe apprenticeship and work-based learning are effective ways to prepare people for the workforce, train the next generation of workers, and get people into high-paying jobs and career paths, at the same time helping employers meet their needs. I would add one other bullet on here parenthetically. And in many states, young people, if they do choose a college path, many times they leave to go to school somewhere and then they never return to their communities. And then I've seen other communities that are actively engaged in youth apprenticeship, and it's creating a decent and reasonable and good pathway for students in their own communities. And so there is a little bit more of a draw to keep them there and begin a career. So amidst that backdrop, let me quickly move to my friend Roger over at Siemens. Roger, welcome today. Just wanted to do a little housekeeping. Let's get right into it. I think a lot of people in North Carolina have seen you around talking about apprenticeship over the years. North Carolina has been one of the initial leaders in a lot of this apprenticeship work, particularly Siemens, but there's a lot of really interesting things going on. So Roger, welcome. Tell us a little bit, well, first of all, tell us a little bit about you and what you do and some of the boards you sit on, and then I want to ask you a little bit about the Siemens story, and then we'll flip to some new material.
Sure, absolutely. So again, I'm Roger Collins. I'm a proud apprentice graduate myself. I graduated from the apprentice school at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia as a journeyman machinist. And I never would have dreamed at that time that I would be running my own apprenticeship now at Siemens Energy. So I'm very passionate about apprenticeship, and I know personally how it can change people's lives. Siemens has been in apprenticeship, the local Siemens is since 2011, and so we're doing very well. It's become an integral part of our workforce development program, our workforce development project, and we're very, very happy with our programs.
Roger, can you tell us a little bit about, let me take you back to 2011 or 12 and those earlier days of getting started. Just very briefly, what drove you, what partners had to come together, and was it a super heavy lift at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. Siemens Energy, I tell people that we don't make power, but we build the machines that make power. We build steam turbine engines, gas turbine engines, and generators for the power industry. To give you an example of the type and size of machines that we build, our new HL9000 gas turbine generates 570,000 horsepower and over 1 million foot-pounds of torque. Our generators will generate anywhere from 150 megawatts of power to 1,600 megawatts of power. 1,600 megawatts of power, about 800,000 homes. So prior to 2011, we built steam turbines and steam turbines and generators in Charlotte. We built our gas turbines in Hamilton, Ontario. About 2009, 2010, our managing board decided that they wanted to make Charlotte the energy hub for Siemens in the United States. So we decided to move that gas turbine manufacturing to our Charlotte site. In doing so, we needed to hire about 800 people very, very quickly. And we realized very, very quickly that the people that we needed with the technical skills just weren't on the job market. And so it's interesting that at the time we had a contingent from Germany at our factory, and they were listening to us whine and cry about our workforce development woes. And so they asked, where's your apprenticeship program? Why aren't you feeding your pipeline with apprenticeships? And everyone looked around the table and said, well, we don't have one. So we got the finger wag and the nasty gram from our corporate offices, and they said, you need to start an apprenticeship. It's the best, most effective way to build your workforce. So that's kind of how we got into that. And
but Roger, you have an interesting twist on the Siemens story, right? Because certainly then, unlike now, I mean, I think we can acknowledge there is a emerging and growing movement for youth apprenticeship in the country, and that's some of what we're going to get into today. You guys are really forerunners of youth apprenticeship in this country, and you decided to focus on youth, is that right? Which, in 2011, 12, 13 was not very common. So what was the desire, what was the interest in doing youth-specific apprenticeships? I assumed you did adult, but what was the specific interest in youth?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a long-running apprenticeship for some of our incumbent workers in industrial maintenance. But one of the things that we learned was that, especially in our industry, a lot of the individuals, the pipeline that we were trying to fill was being emptied by individuals who were aging out, who were retiring. And so that group of incumbent workers just wasn't available. And we learned early on that we were going to have to start early. And so we start talking about apprenticeship in the intermediate schools, moving up to high schools, and even in the community colleges. And we learned that the pipeline from youth is our most effective pipeline, and that's for a couple of reasons. Youth are very ambitious, and one of the things that we talk about that we learn is that young people will likely change companies 4 times in the decade after they graduate. Mm-hmm. And so why is that? And a lot of people would say, oh, well, millennial this, Generation Z that. But I think what I have learned, and I think what the studies and data have shown, is that they're ambitious and they're looking for opportunities within the company to move up. And the apprenticeship and those basic skills that the apprenticeship gives them is the jumping off point for that. So we've had 26 graduates in our program. We currently have 16, and 5 of those 26 have already advanced, continued their education and advanced into engineering roles. So, you know, the ambition that these youth have is just is exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah, well, the ambition coupled with the access and opportunity that you provide them. And you brought other employers into that partnership, right? It wasn't just all about Siemens, was it? You worked with Piedmont Community College and you brought other employers in your supply chain, right? So it was
Absolutely.
a sort of effort?
Yes, that's correct. And one of the things that we realized, we knew that in Charlotte that there were other companies that were experiencing the same kind of difficulties that we were. And so we decided to reach out. We partnered with Central Piedmont Community College as our related instruction partner. And we were able to connect with them. And they knew the other companies in the area who were struggling just like Siemens was to find qualified people. And so through Central Piedmont Community College, we made connections with other companies in the area, Bosch Rexroth, Groninger, Apprenticeship 2000. And we were able to expand in Charlotte, bring other companies into the fold. And so it's not just in advanced manufacturing either.
Right.
Through Central Piedmont, we've been able to move to bring companies into apprenticeship in IT, healthcare, and other non-traditional areas.
Yeah, and you see that happening in places all over the country, but few people do it as well as North Carolina, quite honestly. And you see these programs, you know, over in Guilford County and other parts of other parts of the state trying to do this. So we hope to drive that today. So apprenticeship, quality, rigor, and standards. There's a number of employers on the line today, Roger, and you know, some are small and medium employers, right? But you know, the bottom line of apprenticeship, it is a job. It's not an internship. It's not a work experience. It is a job where you get paid, and then you advance the more skills you get. It has structured on-the-job learning. It has related training and instruction, so it complements the on-the-job learning. It's an ongoing assessment of skills and competencies on the job front with a supervisor, and it culminates in a recognized post-secondary credential. That's sort of, you know, any apprenticeship has those basics to it, right? But Roger, do you have to be a major global company like Siemens to do apprenticeship? I mean, I know the answer to that, but you know, small and medium-sized companies don't have a huge HR department. They don't have you know, chief learning officers. They don't have big legal departments to see what's legal and illegal about it. What's your advice to small and medium-sized businesses out there, Roger?
Yeah, companies like Siemens, your larger companies, it would seem like on the outside that it would be easy for a big organization to get into apprenticeship and to manage apprenticeship. But in my experience, the opposite is true. I have layers of red tape that I have to go through to get permission to do this, to bring on apprentices, how many, that sort of thing. I'm constantly fighting with our finance department about the investment that we're making in apprenticeship. And I've learned as chairman of the council in North Carolina and co-chair of the State Apprenticeship Council Alliance, working with companies around the nation, that the smaller companies with 100 employees or less, or even as little as 25 employees, is much easier to start apprenticeship, to maintain apprenticeship, and to advance those employees into those key roles in their organizations. The level of permissions, you know, most of the time you're a phone call away from the owner of the company. And so there's not those levels of bureaucracy and administration that you have to go through. So it's a much simpler process with a smaller company.
Yeah. And would you recommend a group of companies come together? So 8 or 10 manufacturers, 3 or 4 healthcare facilities, some sort of group approach to this in a region of North Carolina. I know in Gulford has a great model where they've brought together some manufacturers. Gulford. I'm sorry for the mispronunciation. But where they've done that work. So, you know, is that a recommendation to bring groups of employers together? So 1, they're not stealing employees from each other for $1 an hour more. 2, they can agree on a common curriculum. 4, they can work collaboratively with schools and post-secondary institutions in their communities. Ideas on that?
Yes, I would totally agree. A group like the Guilford Apprenticeship Partners or the Career Accelerator Program in Alamance County, it was a group of employers who were smaller, and they came together through the basic framework of Apprenticeship 2000 and put together a conglomeration of companies. And the basic, for me, the basic premise behind doing that is that these companies can share resources. They get together and recruit together. They hold their recruiting events as a group, and it makes it so much easier to promote apprenticeship, to go out to recruit from high schools with the youth when you're doing it as a group. And you can have one presentation and cover 5 different areas, such as advanced manufacturing, healthcare, or IT. And it's a highly effective model for apprenticeship in North Carolina.
All right, Roger, I'm told that I'm over, but that won't stop me. I'm probably going to get the hook momentarily, but just a couple of quick things. I'm going to go on for another minute, and I've got sort of a last question for you.
Sure.
So just with apprenticeship, as we're talking about today, it's structured work-based learning programs designed to start when apprentices are in high school. They complete their educational activities in high school. They work at a job, full or part-time, making money. And high-quality youth apprenticeships are built on partnerships that include employers, high schools, post-secondary education, and other business groups, community organizations, et cetera. So the partnerships are key to apprenticeships, and having an intermediary, somebody who's the glue that holds it all together, is probably one of the tenets of our PIA project.
Yes.
DOL, et cetera. Next slide, please. Sorry, Roger, I got to get these slides or Andrea's going to yell.
You're okay.
So that's the paid learning, the skills assessment. We're going to make all these available to folks. Do I have any other slides after this? I think I got 1 or 2 more real quick. So some of the PIA principles are listed here in terms of career-oriented, equitable, portable, adaptable, and accountable. And if you Google PIA, P-A-Y-A, or Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship in New America, there's a ton of materials on there that dig even deeper to this, including a model about how this works. So I really recommend, if you're seriously looking at it, to do that. Next slide.
If you want to go back 1 slide, Rachel, that would be great. Sorry, we're having technical difficulties, folks. There we go. So I think what's really powerful about this slide, and this is Andrea messing Matthew while Eric is I think, having some technical difficulties. This is the infographic that helps to show the transition, and this is kind of an ideal state to show the transition of what a youth apprenticeship would look like between high school, post-secondary, and kind of program completion. And the power of the connectivity here is really thinking about how we leverage the time that folks spend in high school. We leverage their career and technical education time. We have an opportunity to do paid on-the-job learning in high school that helps them transition into their post-secondary opportunities more seamlessly. So there's less of that, what do I do with my life, and more of the, how do I do this, and there's a plan for me, and I have a mentor in place to help me transition to this next phase of my life. And this also then helps to move folks along in their transition from high school to college, and it helps employers with their talent pipeline management.
Great.
So, yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Let me just finish up, Andrea. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's another slide there or not. But
there is not.
Roger, what I really want to ask you, we have employers on the line, colleges, high school folks, other stakeholders on the line, North Carolina Office of Apprenticeship, Catherine's team, ApprenticeshipNC through the Community College, Elizabeth's team. There's a lot of resources that help out there for companies who want to engage in this work or stakeholders who want to learn more about it. What advice are you going to have for employers overall for why this is an imperative of youth apprenticeship to train the next generation of workers? So if you just give us about 30 seconds on why it's critical for employers to do this and how they might get some support to do it, we're all ears.
Yes, it's absolutely critical, especially coming out of COVID. Apprenticeship is going to be one of the premier or the primary avenues that we have for bringing people back into the workforce. Again, in North Carolina specifically, there are many ways to be right. I can't stress enough how flexible apprenticeship is. Whether you're going with the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Apprenticeship or you have a state apprenticeship agency, very flexible. Those are the individuals who are experts at the programs. Please, those are the ones that you need to talk to. I can make myself available. I do it all the time. I'm glad to do so. But one of the things that I'd like to address too, if I may, is a lot of companies and employers have an aversion to bringing on youth who are under the age of 18. And again, there are many ways to be right. Most states have laws that say that if a young person is in an accredited training program, such as an apprenticeship, that they can be employed as young as the age of 16. And One of the ways that Siemens has a hard and fast rule that we can only employ people that are 18 and over. So what we do as an alternative to that is we'll hire our youth apprentices as contract workers and let the contract agency bear the cost of their insurance, and we're able to bring them in the factory as young as 16.
And that's so good to note. I mean, many states, in North Carolina, one of them have passed some policies and rules that has really helped expand opportunities in apprenticeship. I know also in North Carolina, you're working on diversity issues and bringing more women into manufacturing and IT and all of that. Well, Roger, you made me go long. I'm going to get in trouble with my team, but I really appreciate you. You know, I was kid Roger. How do you have time for your day job with doing all this apprenticeship work? But I'm sure you do some work for Siemens. But we really appreciate your leadership both nationally and within North Carolina, and your offer to be a resource for folks out there. You got a whole team of navigators out there to help employers. So if this information piques your interest, by all means, by the end of today, you'll be able to reach out to some great resources to get you started. With that, I want to thank Roger, and I want to pivot to my good friend Brent Parton at New America. I'm sorry, Brent, that I've chewed into your time so much. Brent and the team at New America conceived the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, asked us to join them as a partner, which was, and 8 others groups in there as a partner. Many of you in North Carolina know Brent, formerly worked at National Governors Association. He and I worked together at the Department of Labor, and now he's the Deputy Director of the Center on Education and Skills at New America. That's putting out some pretty good information on youth apprenticeships as well, so you might want to check their website. Brent, can I turn it over to you?
Sure thing. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Roger, and good morning, everyone. I'll keep my comments brief. I think there was a lot of great information in that previous discussion that I don't need to reiterate, but I will say again, so my name is Brent Parton. I'm the Deputy Director of the Center on Education and Labor at New America. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization based in Washington, D.C. That focuses on education and workforce policy and research. One of the things that we do that relates to North Carolina in particular is we are the convener of the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, which is a national initiative, multi-year, multi-partner effort to expand high-quality youth apprenticeship programs across the country. We are, of course, thrilled to have JFF as one of our national partners in this work to help support things like this to come together. And of course, we are mostly thrilled about being able to partner with people like places like the great state of North Carolina through the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. I want to say a huge congrats to Andrea, Eric, Jonathan, and the whole team at JFF for the support of putting this work together, but most importantly, the whole team in North Carolina, the incredible work of Elizabeth Standifer, Charlie Milling, the whole team at the Youth Apprenticeship Office over at the North Carolina Community College System, and of course, Catherine and Maureen Little for their leadership on this work as well statewide. It's exciting to see folks come together. It's important to take a step back and recognize that, as we heard already from the words of Roger Collins, who I remember meeting years ago, having barbecue with outside the Siemens facility back when we were conducting research on youth apprenticeship across the country, that the modern youth apprenticeship movement today very much has North Carolina roots. This state has been a leader in showing the way for other parts of the country that have been expanding youth apprenticeship efforts over the past 10 years. A lot of that was, of course, concentrated around innovations throughout the Piedmont region, from Charlotte all the way up through Guilford County and beyond, and largely focused in the advanced manufacturing sector. It's been a model for how we can defy expectations, and that, yes, young people can be apprentices, and most importantly, for an employer perspective, hiring young people as apprentices delivers a return on investment for your firm. North Carolina has also showed that it's about regional partnerships, and they've taught the rest of the country that when multiple employers can come together and agree that this is a talent pipeline problem that they want to work together to solve, and work in partnership with K-12, our CTE systems, and just as important, our community colleges, we can put together strong, sustainable programs that last and programs that deliver results. That has been a model, and North Carolina has shown the way for a lot of other parts of the country. The challenge now, and what we have been most thrilled about, to both invest through our grant initiative, as Elizabeth rightfully mentioned, North Carolina was one of 9 places with over 200 applications from 49 states to receive the inaugural grant and investment from the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. And we're looking forward to continuing our support for North Carolina in the next phase of this work. It was one of the few places we invested in, not just though because of its track record of success. I want to be clear about that. It was about the potential of what lay ahead. And what Elizabeth and team have put in place over the past 2 years through our partnership is really to show that youth apprenticeship, yes, we know works in North Carolina, but it can work across multiple regions and across many industry sectors. Multiple regions where there are willing employer partners, where there are willing education partners that will come to the table and collaborate. And we've seen that through the work that they've driven to bring the model to new heights in areas like the far west of North Carolina and bringing together partners in the eastern part of the state. The second thing that they've also shown is that youth apprenticeship, while it has a critical backbone in our advanced manufacturing sector, it is a model that is highly flexible and that can be adapted to multiple industry sectors, from IT, as we've seen down in Charlotte, to hospitality, to looking at even agriculture and healthcare. Their apprenticeship is about a model, it's a workforce and education training model that can be adapted to meet multiple industry sectors' needs. So what we have been excited about and why this network that has been launched here in the state of North Carolina is important is to show and drive expansion that youth apprenticeship is something that can work across the state, and it is something that can work for many more jobs and serve many more young people across our state. What it's going to take, though, and why this network is valuable, is that no region should have to start from scratch. Roger's already hinted that there was collaboration across those various early pioneering partnerships across the state to share best practices, to share resources, to be able to share tips of the trade. That needs to continue if we're going to accelerate this model across the state of North Carolina. And this network is going to be a critical element for making that happen. On the second piece of this is that when we're talking about youth in particular, yes, there are challenges. Sure, there are things that are different than bringing in, say, someone who's 25 or 26, or the average age of an apprentice in the United States, which is closer to 30 than 16. But when you're bringing in youth, it means you're deliberately connecting with your high schools and your infrastructure that really happens across the state to help young people transition out of high school into post-secondary and into the workforce. That brings complications, but it also brings sustainability and a foundation for these programs. You have led the way already as a state to create a sustainable funding stream to be able to support apprenticeship opportunities for young people. You can take advantage of those CTE dollars. You can take advantage of those state higher education dollars by aligning your apprenticeship programs with your formal education systems. That's something that we should really be excited to explore deeper today. And I challenge everyone to learn more about the regions that have figured that out. And most critically, when you're talking about dealing with young people, you're talking about doing a homegrown workforce development strategy. That is where the future workers are. Many of the states that have set ambitious goals to grow apprenticeship know that their future apprentices are in middle school today. If you're not getting to them, if you're not getting exposure to them early on, that this is a really high quality option, that talent is not going to be retained in your community, and most certainly it's not going to be something that you can tap as an effective workforce strategy. So there are many things that require extra steps when it comes to working with young people. But what we've seen across the country, and most importantly in the state of North Carolina, is that it certainly carries special benefits. So we are excited about the next phase of this work in North Carolina under the leadership of an incredible team that you not only have at the community college system, but from the other state agencies that have been brought on together to also think about how to make it easier for regions across the state to lead this work. And we're even more thrilled about, of course, the prospect of linking together all these innovative projects that are happening across the state to make sure you're sharing best resources, best practices, and creating efficiencies along the way to really grow youth apprenticeship in a sustainable way. So our hope generally, or I should put it this way, our hope is that North Carolina not only was sort of the leader of the most recent wave of youth apprenticeship in the United States, but it is again the pioneer in the next wave. So with that, I will hand back to Jonathan, and looking forward to the rest of the conversations today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brent. I think that your framing of youth apprenticeship and apprenticeship for young adults as a network and as a partnership, and specifically sort of thinking about the importance of of youth and young adult apprenticeship is really essential here. And we're now, next slide, please. Thank you. Actually, and next slide, please. We're now going to have the opportunity to really drill down into the importance of youth and young adult apprenticeships in North Carolina specifically. And so I'm really happy to introduce Catherine Castell, and who is the apprenticeship director for the North Carolina Community College System. And so, Catherine, you're on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for putting this together. This is very exciting, and I really enjoyed Eric and Roger's conversation. I think it's really a good lead-in to what we're talking about here today, and an excellent example of North Carolina. If we can bring up the slides, please. And we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. I want everyone to be thinking about, and I really appreciate Roger and Eric's comments, because it really is a foundation on what apprenticeship is. So for everyone, while we're talking more in detail about apprenticeship, youth apprenticeship, be thinking about, how it really fits, how it does show a pathway, a career path, and especially for the employers on the call, for your industry, for your company internally, how can this fit for you to build a talent pipeline in your industry so that you have good, highly skilled workers? So please keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the meeting today. Next slide. So in North Carolina, I wanted to give everyone an idea. We've been talking about the growth. We've been talking about the need, the skills gap, the skills opportunity, and all of that. And I wanted to give you a good picture here of how it really has grown in North Carolina. And everyone knows that apprenticeship is employer-driven. We would not be here without our employers, so we are very thankful for each and every one of them. But if you look at the chart here, specifically on the left, you'll see from 2016, the number of apprentices that were served, and how it has grown has more than doubled over the last 4 years. And then to the right of that, the active apprentices. Active apprentices are those apprentices that are registered with us, they're employed with the company, that are actually receiving training in apprenticeship. And those numbers for us in North Carolina, as you can see, 5,000 in 2016 to over 12,000 in 2020. And these are numbers as of June 30th of this year. So we're very excited about this. And then the pie chart to the right. Okay, so we have these apprentices. Where are they? What industries are looking at apprenticeships and growing with apprenticeships? And if you'll see, advanced manufacturing and construction are very close to each other. And from what I've been hearing from construction companies, the reason that is only because they're not able to still find enough apprentices for them. But advanced manufacturing is definitely growing. But I also want to point out a couple other industry sectors to you, and that's healthcare and IT. Now, these are some industry sectors that are definitely taken off in North Carolina. We just recently registered UNC Medical, and Atrium Health has just completed their registration process, and it's under review now. We have more and more of those companies coming on board because of the need and because of the word is out. Apprenticeship is definitely the way to go. But look at IT. It's a very low at 4% right there, but everyone has IT. It's definitely cybersecurity, definitely a need there, but IT is in every industry. Every company has some type of IT person, and companies are looking at this as an opportunity for apprenticeship as well. Next slide. So our focus today on youth. And as mentioned before, we are very grateful with Elizabeth and her team. Elizabeth is our statewide manager for youth. And if you can just look at our numbers here and how they have grown, we are very pleased with this, and we are definitely looking into growing even more, because if you look at just the active apprentices from 2016 to 2020, those are numbers that are extremely high, and they're growing. We've got more and more employers inquiring about youth apprenticeship and inquiring of how can they get it fit into their talent pipeline. So where are these youth apprenticeships at? And of course, advanced manufacturing has been the largest and the lead with youth apprenticeships so far. And I think that's just showing because of the word of mouth. And as people like Roger and companies like Roger who are talking to other companies in the manufacturing area, I do believe that is why that has grown so quickly. But we are seeing other industries coming into play, other industries that are looking into this and are wanting to become involved. So I'm very excited. I'm really interested to see how this pie chart changes over just the upcoming year. Next slide. Thankfully, to some grants that we received from the U.S. Department of Labor, we were able to contract out with our North Carolina Department of Commerce partners in LEAD to do a return on investment study for just North Carolina employers. And we just recently received the results of that study, and I wanted to share a little bit with you on that. And from the study of employers in North Carolina, for every dollar invested in apprentices, there's a net value of $1.70. We're very excited about those numbers, and the report is actually on our website, and for the details of it, you're welcome to go there. But I want to share another piece about the ROI study. So on the next slide, please. Just a couple of bullet points to bring to your attention on the study. And the interesting fact here that I want to share with you is we did start the study right when COVID came into play. So I'm very excited to say we still had a lot of employers who responded. And granted, I can't imagine how they were scrambling, trying to get things in place for their employees to make it safe and productive, because manufacturing's still going. Even with COVID, our companies, they're still growing and they're still using registered apprenticeship. So on this slide, you can see that nearly half said that employee turnover among employers was low. I mean, we actually had, it's just higher retention. We had higher retention on our apprenticeship programs. Next slide, please. And in this slide, I wanted to give you an idea. This is also on our website, but I wanted to give you an idea of how we're covering the state. We're a small staff, and thankfully to some grant funds from U.S. Department of Labor, we're able to hire some apprenticeship coordinators and some coordinators through the community college. So we're very, very grateful for that. But this will give you an idea of where you are in the state and who is your local apprenticeship consultant, who is your coordinator in your area. And would like to encourage you to go to our website for this and more information. And also, we have lots of materials on our website that were recently developed that you're welcome to share and welcome to use. But I do believe my time is coming to a close. So I will end it there, and we'll go to our next slide. And this is to our website for everyone to feel free to go there and find out more materials and more information on apprenticeship. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Jenny Korn, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives with My Future NC. We're very happy to have her. She's a great partner with us, and very excited that she's able to be here on the call with us. So, Jenny, it's all yours.
That is great. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for inviting us to present today. My name is Jenny Korn. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives for My Future NC. And my work really focuses on facilitating at the state level cross-sector collaborations. MyFutureNC is a brand new, statewide nonprofit. We're kind of the new kid on the block with really helping to facilitate the education to workforce pipeline. I'm going to talk a little bit about MyFutureNC today and the work we've been doing with some of our wonderful kind of state level partners focused on workforce credentials and the vision that we're building together around defining high quality credentials, non-degree credentials for the state. Next slide. We can keep going. Sorry, we've got our website up on there. It's the MyFutureNC. So MyFutureNC, like I said, is a brand new statewide nonprofit. We're not even a year old yet. So don't worry if you guys haven't heard about us. We really are driven from the data in North Carolina around the skills gap problem. There was a statewide commission that was set up in 2017 as part of a UNC system effort led by President Margaret Spellings, really wanting to help the state drive around attainment as the goal, that achieving educational attainment for North Carolina citizens really helps move the needle on economic mobility and economic prosperity for our communities. So we started with questions about the data. Where were we now? Recognizing that 67% of jobs in North Carolina require a high quality credential or post-secondary degree. Much of this information is from our partners at Commerce. Every other year, they have an employer survey, collect data from thousands of employers around the state, asking folks who they're looking to hire. So we have about 2/3 of jobs in North Carolina require some education after high school. The work that the MyFutureNC Commission did in partnership, we brought in some national experts, had some data analysis done, and recognizing that only 49% of North Carolinians have completed that level of education. So you see this disconnect between the jobs that are required in the state and then what we currently have. We also got some information that from that survey with Commerce about that North Carolina employers are looking to hire hireable workers, citing lack of skills and overall education. So next slide. And also not just in that skills gap, not just starting with the skills gap data, but also looking at the value, data that helps us understand the value of education after high school. So the graph on the left is some analysis, again, from our partners at Commerce. They're a wonderful data analysis partner in the state, a ton of resources that they have both on their website and capacity in their staff. We asked them to help us understand here in North Carolina, do degrees equal dollars? And so what we found using North Carolina specific data was that higher education is associated with higher earnings. We've seen a lot of this data at the national level, but having it here in our state, recognizing that, so what this graph shows is 15 years after high school, somebody with just a high school graduate, no additional degree, can expect to earn a median wage of almost $27,000. Comparing that to an associate's degree, so somebody that's graduated from the community college, 15 years out, looking at almost $56,000 as a median wage, and then bachelor's degree close to 83. Similar, we know that education helps maintain employment even during times of great recession. So that's what these two graphs, I think, are really helping us to understand not just what that gap is, but then the value that we all know intrinsically is really backed up with this data specific to North Carolina. Next slide. So in last year, in 2019, at the conclusion of the MyFutureNC Commission, the General Assembly put forth House Bill 644 that codified a brand new statewide attainment goal into law. So 2 million North Carolinians between the ages of 25 and 44 will have a high quality credential or post-secondary degree by 2030. Next slide. And so here, what we're really focused on, specifically in the workforce credentials work is determining what counts. So here you'll see a graph that shows the 2 million, the projection of 2 million, and the gap, considering, so the blue and the green on this graph are our current projected path. And so what we have is a 300,000 shortfall by 2030. And so there's work going on at the state level, cross-sector partnership, to try to define which workforce credential would count towards our goal. And so here we've defined workforce credentials as high quality, non-degree credentials, so not bachelor's, not associates, valued by North Carolina employers that support North Carolinians in obtaining a living wage job. Next slide. And again, looking to the data to think about projected growth in North Carolina occupations, we see that this post-secondary non-degree space is the fastest growing jobs in North Carolina require a post-secondary or non-degree credentials, and that the growth of those jobs is outpacing total job growth in the state. Next slide. Again, so there's a group of folks working at the state level to define these North Carolina workforce credentials. Next slide. And what we've been working together to do, and this is a partnership between North Carolina Department of Commerce, the North Carolina Business Committee for Education and the Governor's Office, the Community College System, our Department of Public Instruction and CTE. We've got folks from the NC Works Commission, our local workforce boards, My Future NC, and we have been meeting pretty regularly, and we've recently conducted, I think I've got that on a slide, a bunch of industry engagement sessions to get feedback on the non-degree credential space. So we've defined this continuum of credential categories, going from foundational, so those core non-degree credentials that help demonstrate standard or baseline skill sets, things like first aid, soft skills, notary, a certification in notary. And then the next level up we've defined as essential credentials. So these are the credentials that put you on a path to lead you towards a sustainable wage career. Nurse's aid 1, pharmacy tech, construction labor. Next level, our level 3 is really around career credentials. And those are credentials that support a sustainable wage career. Law enforcement, HVAC technicians, and that space, the essential and career credentials, is where this group has been most focused, because we also know that there are these advanced credentials. So credentials that support advanced career development. If you go to the next slide. So here, this project, this NC Workforce Team project, and this presentation was really to make sure that folks in the field are aware this initiative is going on. So as you're hearing and learning and getting emails about asking for feedback, so here we have just to give you a timeline of the work that's been done to date and kind of what some next steps are. So that core team I was talking about from Commerce and the Community College and the Governor's Office participated as a state team in this Credentials of Value Institute. And then we began developing and recruiting core team members back in the state. We developed a work plan, defined some subcommittees. We had a big kickoff meeting, and then we've been working really closely with Commerce and the Community College System and the Department of Public Instruction to analyze data and think about, given Department of Labor wage earnings, job openings, and which credentials are required for those positions, we defined an initial list of North Carolina workforce credentials, started thinking about policy incentives that we could potentially use, looking and learning from other states. Indiana has been leading in this space for many, many years, and so looking to our partners in Indiana, Florida, and Kentucky, and Tennessee, Washington State, to think about what can we learn, what are some state-level policies or investments that have really moved the needle on helping people earn these non-degree workforce credentials. How can we prioritize a list? And so we've been facilitating this cross-sector group has been facilitating input from employers. We targeted initially construction and trades, manufacturing, transportation and logistics, hospitality and tourism, and healthcare as our first kind of industry engagement sessions. And now we're going to be summarizing that feedback and identifying an initial draft list of these state-recognized non-degree workforce credentials. And then we'll be pushing out, we're working on developing a broad stakeholder engagement survey so that we'll be able to push that out more broadly in the coming month or so to get an initial round of feedback on that draft list. And then we'll be spending, once we get that data back, developing policy recommendations for our state level leaders, making recommendations from things we've heard from the field inside the state, and then things we've learned from our state, from other states around the country. Next slide. So with that, I just wanted to make sure, again, just provide a quick overview of the work that's been going on at the state level in partnership, My Future NC, in partnership with the workforce boards, Commerce, the governor's office, the community college system, and just make sure that the participants in today's conference, as you begin to hear and learn and ask for more input, you'll know what the intent and what was driving some of that work at the state level.
Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate all of that incredible data, and there was a really robust chat box discussion. I want to encourage all of you to use the chat box to post comments and questions and just to enrich the conversation. So at this point, I want to pivot to a focus on regions. Could you move to the next slide? So just to reintroduce myself, my name is Andrea Messing-Mathy. I'm a director at the Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning at JFF, and I'm joined today by some folks across the regions in North Carolina. So first, Hillary Crittenden. She is the director for the Charlotte Executive Leadership Council. And then we have Nathan Ramsey, the director of the Mountain Area Workforce Development Board and with Land of Sky Regional Council. Chris Rivera, and he's the Director of Workforce Development for the City of Greensboro, and Craig Vogt. I hope I pronounced that correct, Craig, and you'll correct me if I didn't, Executive Director for the Wayne Business and Industry. And so thank you to my panelists for joining today. I'll just give a couple of brief comments before we get a chance to hear from all of them. So the frame for this 35-minute panel is really on the power of apprenticeship for youth and young adults and the work that happens locally/regionally. And a focus on region does multiple things. First, it lets us develop a community vision for training and skills that's really responsive to the needs of local employers and dynamics. Many of us know that the work of employers, particularly with small and medium-sized businesses, it really is deeply local, and the hiring is deeply local. And some of the work that has to happen to acclimatize and get folks prepared and thinking about apprenticeships really has to happen through those local relationships. Secondly, a focus on regions gives us the ability to proactively and intensively work with local employers to raise the awareness and navigate the apprenticeship system. It feels complicated. It feels sometimes more complicated than it needs to. And the work at the regional level allows folks to feel like they have someone to go to when they need to kind of work through some of those complexities. Third, it allows us to connect to post-secondary partners, particularly community colleges that are embedded in local communities and economies and are often the bedrock for how the local communities and economies actually further their education. And the fourth, it affords us the ability to work closely with employers to identify really creative and flexible solutions to long-term hiring needs. So ultimately, without the employers in the room, all of this is an academic exercise, right? So for those employers that are on the call today, I deeply appreciate your participation here. And I want to just elevate that the work that you're doing at the local level and the work that you're doing at the regional level is really crucial to make sure that we create the right kind of opportunities that both support your businesses and support the needs of young people. I also want to take a moment to talk a little bit about kind of that the work at the regional level also lets us create strong and sustainable relationships between those employers, high schools, colleges, and workforce boards. So the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act really gives states the authority to establish policies and procedures that relate to a range of issues if the policies and procedures are consistent with the regulations and other federal statutes. So the local workforce board then in turn must establish those local policies and procedures that help support businesses. So those WIOA, so Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, those funds can be used for registered apprenticeship and supportive services. And that can include related and technical instruction. It can include on-the-job training, including pre-apprenticeship, supportive services, youth occupational skills training, incumbent worker training, and it can include some supportive services. And that can include books, childcare supplies, transportation tools, and uniforms. So I say all of this to share that the ability is there, the opportunity is there, but what's really necessary in order for apprenticeship for youth and young adults to work is the local will, and that's anchored in a vision for economic growth and mobility. So I'd like to open with our panelists, and I'd like to actually ask Hillary to just kick us off here and just provide a brief description of your local youth apprenticeship approach, including what organization you represent, your industries, and some employers that you work with.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. So I am the director of the Charlotte Executive Leadership Council. The CELC is a board of 27 CEOs and 3 university presidents of organizations headquartered here in Charlotte. We have a mission of driving economic mobility in our region, and one of our tenets for impact is really focused on workforce development. And so we've been doing this work collectively as a CEO council for a little bit over 4 years. The group is made up of large and small employers, but certainly has representation from some of the largest employers here in Charlotte, Atrium Health and Novant Health. Our group is chaired by Brian Moynihan of Bank of America. The group was founded by Lynn Good, who leads Duke Energy. Also now have Honeywell, Truist, Lowe's, Train Technologies, Rogers Builders, a large variety of different kinds of companies, Avid Exchange, Red Ventures, new sort of technologies and new organizations that have joined our board in the past couple of years. For us, the CEOs that sit on our council have been involved in other organizations where apprenticeship has been a priority. And for us as a group, we elected to focus in on opportunity youth as a population we wanted to support. So there was a lot of intersection between the opportunity to create career pathways for those youth and the sort of privileges that apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships for youth provide. So our approach has been to work with ApprenticeshipNC, work with existing players here in Charlotte that we have relationships with to develop new strategies, or in some cases to really link together pieces that were already existing that had most of the tenets of an apprenticeship, but not necessarily were not necessarily registered at that time. And so have had some success this year registering 2 young adult programs and starting 2 high school pre-apprenticeship programs that feed into those young adult programs, both in the technology space. One focused more on fintech through an organization called the Carolina FinTech Hub that's here in Charlotte, also employer-led. Another that is through a program called Road to Hire, which is sponsored by and was created by Red Ventures, which is a company on our board, but now has ownership and a lot of support from companies across the CELC.
That's exciting, and it's really great to hear about your focus on opportunity youth. I'm going to get a lot of feedback. I'm wondering if we could pivot briefly to Chris Rivera. Chris, I'm wondering if you can speak to us about your, sorry folks, if you're not on mute, if you're not speaking, if you don't mind muting yourselves, that would be great. Thank you, I appreciate it. So Chris, I'd like to pivot to you, if you wouldn't mind, just providing a brief description of your youth apprenticeship approach and kind of what organization you represent, your industries, and some of the employers that you work with.
Absolutely, and thanks again for allowing me to participate. So I actually represent the local workforce development board. I serve as the executive director for Guilford Works. Our organization does not operate or have a registered youth apprenticeship program. However, we are in a county that, or a region that has 4 youth apprenticeship consortiums. And Roger mentioned a couple of them earlier in the program. We have our Guilford Apprenticeship Partners, or GAP, Alamance County's Career Accelerator Program, Apprenticeship Randolph, as well as Rocky Top out of Randolph County. These programs or consortiums represent nearly 80 employers, that each of which we've identified critical workforce needs within their respective industries, have created partnerships with our public school systems within their respective communities to identify rising juniors and seniors to be tapped to fill those needs. Industries represented in those consortiums range everywhere from innovative and advanced manufacturing, information technology, automotive, supply chain logistics, and skilled trade workforces, skilled trades such as HVAC, plumbing, electricians, and things like that. I wouldn't dare try to select the right employers that are parts of those consortiums. Again, there are some 80 of them, but the workforce system plays a good role in helping support some of those individuals that may be going into those programs.
That's great, very helpful, and I appreciate that. So, Nathan, I'm wondering if I can pivot to you. I'd like to dig into the regional approach a little bit. So please tell us a little bit about kind of the work that you're doing with Youth Apprenticeships, the organization you represent. But then thinking about deepening the question a little bit here, what's the role that you see for employers?
Well, good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this panel. And, I think the takeaway I hope people receive is apprenticeship growth is really based on the power of partnerships, and that's the role that the workforce boards can provide. And because we bring the public schools, community colleges, universities, other partners, and employers to the table. Our region traditionally has not had many youth apprenticeships. If you're referring to individuals who are under the age of 18, we have had 2 companies, Advanced Super Abrasives in Madison County and GE Aviation in Buncombe County, that have had those programs and have been really successful with them. But to the earlier discussion that Roger had, there's sometimes resistance for individuals under 18 working on a job site. So, the growth that we're seeing, a lot of that is happening because companies and our partners are taking advantage of the community college tuition waiver. So for students coming out of high school, graduating out of high school, if they go into a registered apprenticeship program within a limited number of days, then there's a tuition waiver. It's no cost to attend the North Carolina Community College system. So AB Tech and Blue Ridge Community College in our region have been really focused on that and trying to expand and grow our apprenticeships. And, we're seeing growth in apprenticeships beyond the traditional sectors in manufacturing and skilled trades. So we're proud to be a part of the PIA effort with the hospitality tourism sector. And we also have other sectors that we're working on with automotive, banking and finance, and other sectors as well.
Thank you, Nathan. And I'll just turn very quickly to Craig. Craig, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about kind of the local approach for youth apprenticeship in your area, the organization you represent, your industries. And then I'm wondering if you could pivot a little bit to talk about how the community college plays an active role in supporting and growing that regional vision for youth apprenticeship.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea. The thing that I do in my organization, I work for the community college, so we got a business and industry center here, and what I specifically do is try to look at how to meet workforce needs with our employers locally within the county. We are, part of a larger workforce development board, and so our county just, they took the initiative to fund this as a joint venture with the community college, and so I'm constantly meeting with employers, and one of the things that I kept hearing when I first came on the job was, we've got a lot of aging workforce. We don't know how we're going to replace them, and then right before COVID, unemployment rates here locally, we're in a rural area, was really low. We were lower than the state average, and we lose a lot of our workforce to the Triangle because it is a very close drive. And so looking at that, we were trying to come up with some sort of initiative that was going to try to keep some of our talent local, but that was also going to give them an opportunity from a youth standpoint to be able to attract students right straight out of high school. And something that Brent mentioned earlier, about pathways. The approach that we really took was trying to create a pathway that, literally showed you how you could enter in high school, or maybe even how you can take an incumbent worker that's one of your lowest paid workers and give them a pathway that they can make it all the way up to the corporate office if they wanted to. So we took a really just kind of approach of making it to just make sense on a piece of paper to where you could see it. And in saying that, we took an integrated approach to allow the associate's degree in industrial maintenance to be the related instruction for the apprenticeship program. Starting that while they're in high school also allows us to be able to help our public school system with a tax basis that's very small in a rural community. A lot of times the enhancement teachers have got to be funded locally versus the state. But we can, through Career College Promise, be able to offer that same thing to our high school students. And so we created a consortia youth apprenticeship program that works with 5 different employers. We're the sponsor of the program. We were trying to implement it in COVID. We didn't get it to implement during COVID. But first we had to build our apprenticeship program itself. The apprenticeship program has gone very, very well, but it was because we've had, first starting with young adults looking to be able to figure out that way of how do they get a job that pays good money, but also how do they get that career, from the My Future NC, you can see that a degree does equal the fact that I'm going to have, higher wages. And so we just took that approach of how could you do that all the way from, the very beginning all the way up to that, highest level. And it's really worked very well for us.
So those are really helpful comments. And I'd like to circle back actually with Hillary, because this concept of consortia has come up multiple times. And I know, Hillary, as the director of the Charlotte Executive Leadership Council, you lead a group of CEOs. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to why the CEOs have come together to form this council, and if you can speak a little bit to the value of that kind of local regional approach to creating some of that statewide coherence, right? So that this work happens at the local level, but how it actually expands out.
Yeah, absolutely. The group actually came together to focus on economic mobility sort of cohesively across the region. And I think when we looked at there's a report here in Charlotte some may be familiar with called the Leading on Opportunity report that dug into reasons why in a study around mobility, Charlotte was 50th out of 50 in terms of an individual's ability to move out of poverty into one of the upper quintiles of wealth over the course of their lifetime. So that deep dive, I think, was a wake-up call for our area that, we felt like there was there has been a really broad and robust philanthropic effort from the private sector, from families, et cetera, in the area, but we weren't cohesively moving the needle. And so I think the idea with the CEO Council was, how can we work better together than we can separately? And what are some of the big themes and problems that we want to take on as a cohesive group of leaders where we can drive a lot of change? And so in no way do we replace the individual foundations of all of our companies. They do. We take on risks that are more strategic in nature and have areas where we think as a group of employers we're uniquely positioned to lead. And so workforce development is obviously an area there. I think one of the things that we tried to do with the work with PAYA was say, the apprenticeship model is working well for some of our peer companies in the manufacturing industries, and Charlotte's actually a national leader for some of the programs we have in that space. Why can't we translate that to some of the other industries that really characterize our region? And then, given that we're a group of sort of strategic thinkers and problem solvers, how can we develop a model that could be leveraged and grown more broadly across the state. And so that was the impetus behind creating the YTAC program, which is the Youth Technology Apprenticeship Camp. It is a fintech-focused program for seniors who are graduating from CMS. Successful completion of the program will offer students acceptance into a variety of pathways, one of which is a full-time apprenticeship where they're then placed at one of the large financial services institutions here in Charlotte. The program was sponsored by the CELC and Bank of America, and we've seen a lot of leadership from them in the development of this, and a lot of sort of belief in the vision from one of the leaders in financial services, which I think is really helpful, that sponsorship and belief from an organization like that. I think that when we developed the model, we were trying to think about how can we create this really quickly and nimbly given what was going on with COVID. So we actually accelerated the timeline of the launch. We were supposed to do it in the summer. We did the program in April, and we had 20 kids start, 20 kids complete the program. We pulled in resources around the state in the esports and STEM fields to really make this engaging for kids. So it felt like it was different than what they were doing every day in an online classroom situation. And we had all 20 of them complete the program, and a number of them have gone on to great pathways, including starting in our WIN cohort, which is the full-time apprenticeship. So it's been exciting, and I think that a great just point to share is that because of the success of the model and the fact that we were forced to create it in a virtual environment, we're actually going to be launching in the next few weeks a cohort of winter pre-apprentices, which are going to be both in Charlotte and in Wilmington, North Carolina. So we've gotten engagement from financial services, fintech organizations in Wilmington to sponsor pre-apprentices there. And if they successfully complete the program, they'll also be offered the chance to participate in that full-time cohort, again, do that virtually and be hired by Live Oak Bank and Encino and some of the other organizations in Wilmington that are driving this. So happy to see that we're seeing some growth and expansion across the state.
So, just very impressed. 1,000 snaps to you guys for getting this stuff done in the middle of what is probably the trickiest educational environment I think that many of us have seen. So I think we might want to dig into a little bit later about kind of how you've been able to do that successfully in this kind of virtual environment. Chris, I'm wondering if we can pivot just very briefly to you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the workforce system, and I know that you mentioned this briefly earlier, but how do you feel like the workforce system and the regional approach can work together to create opportunities for both young people and young adults to support that transition between those two spaces?
So that's a great question. I think when we look at building youth and young adult apprenticeship programs, we don't necessarily defer that much, but the audiences are very different. As mentioned earlier, youth apprenticeships or youth apprentices, I should say, are often defined as school-aged individuals between 16 and 18, whereas young adults can be categorized as non-enrolled individuals between 18 and 24. But truthfully, I believe as we're looking to develop and make those connections between the two, young adults and, for that matter, adult apprenticeship programs, they can also be modeled, after successful youth apprenticeship programs. I think that the strength of identifying those key sectors and working with employers to develop these learning opportunities in which they have these progressive, wage scales that can be very appealing to young adult populations. We have to consider that there are a high number of young adults that are leaving K-12 systems and they may not have a landing pad. Perhaps they may have expressed interest in youth apprenticeship programs, but there was potentially no space for them. And when you think about that, for those that's applicable to, that's where the true intersect or the transition between those two spaces, youth and young adults have. And I think that workforce systems stand the opportunity to develop sponsored apprenticeship programs in which young adults can realize those goals or participate in that level of workforce activity. I think that Well, I would mention that our workforce board recently launched a workforce development board sponsored adult apprenticeship program, and we have young adults as part of that target audience. The benefit of that program, similar to the other consortiums in the Triad area, from an employer perspective, is that aside from the technical assistance and relief of administrative burden that our team is able to provide to them, there's also the ability, as you mentioned, Andrea, the ability to leverage workforce development funds to offset some of the apprenticeship costs for them, specifically educational investments and early training wages. From a young adult apprentice perspective, the added benefit is also that they can leverage workforce development resources to mitigate any unforeseen barriers that may present throughout their participation. So if we looked at creating a model like that, it's a true win-win. And my hope is that peers across the state, workforce peers across the state, will begin to realize and develop more programs like this to address, their workforce needs.
Such interesting insight into how we can leverage programs, right? It's not like the time stops when someone turns 18 and all of a sudden, like, they get off the wheel and just stand there for a second while we figure things out. There's this need to kind of think about how we transition folks seamlessly through a system. And I'm wondering, Craig, if I can pivot to you there and have you speak a little bit about the role of the community college, kind of the system writ large, about helping with that kind of seamless transition in partnership with the workforce boards.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that the community colleges, and for any community college on the line, I'm sure they probably agree, is that one of the things that we've got to do is we got to learn better how to collaborate as community colleges and not compete as community colleges. So, in looking at that, I think each one of the community colleges have unique things about them and strengths about them within the region. And for, especially those that are on the eastern region, from the eastern region and on the western region, we can't compete. We can't be like the large institutions in the Triangle and the Triad over in the Charlotte area. And we have got to partner together better and come together. So, like one of the things that we've been doing locally is we've got almost a consortia of just leadership from the colleges that have come together, and we meet regionally to talk about how we're going to be able to meet workforce needs. Because really, this whole apprenticeship, and the reason why we even got in there was because we had employers that were looking for talent, and we had to try to help them find that talent. So, I think if we work together better to figure out what it is that we each do, that we do well, and to plan, along with our workforce development boards, to plan that and work with our public schools to make sure that, we're getting that talent pipeline to come through. And saying that, the way that we wrote our youth apprenticeship program, what Chris was talking about with young adults, we didn't write it to where it was specifically going to just be something that would limit someone to having to be a high school student that was 16 to 18 years old. We wrote it in mind of thinking about, can we get a WIOA, somebody, WIOA recipient that was a young adult to be able to go in there. So it will work either way on both sides of the house. It's definitely something that community colleges stepping up, they can help them manage the programs. Also, they can take on that burden component of it. So we did hire someone that would actually manage the coordination with the employers, coordination with the apprentices, registering the programs, working with the WIOA staff. Because honestly, when we get past this pandemic and we start to get back to full unemployment again, employers are so busy trying to make sure that they're keeping up and getting that talent need. So I think the community colleges can step in and help in that role also.
Thanks, Craig. That's really helpful to think about kind of how community colleges and workforce boards work together. And so we've had some really great conversations in the chat, and I'm trying to monitor this at the same time. But one of the questions that come up, and I'm going to throw this curveball out to anyone in the group that wants to answer this. One of the insights that's come up many times when I've spoken to employers, and I'm sure this is not going to be anything new to any of you, is helping to elevate the role of kind of non-traditional careers. And we see this now, looking at the trades and opportunities in the trades as viable, important mechanisms for economic mobility in regions across the state. And I'm wondering if any of you can speak to that, about how you've done this work at the regional level and have been able to elevate how these careers and how important and profitable the trades can be.
So, Andrea, I'll take a stab at that. There's a couple of things that we've done across the region. First, I would say actually across the state. So a couple of years ago, the Governor's Commission put out a mandate that workforce boards have to certify career pathways. And so each distinct workforce board or region would identify these in-demand occupations and build out these elongated pathways of, that have multiple entry points, exit points, and displays, wage potential over a period of time. And I thought that that was a great way to encourage and inform communities of what would be seen as non-traditional careers, what the potential in them would be. In the Triad area, we received a grant from the General Assembly under an initiative called the Eastern Triad Workforce Initiative. And part of that grant was used to increase public awareness in non-traditional careers, in high schools, in adult populations, and things like that. And so that extra targeted campaigning to increase awareness of what these potentials are has increased our youth apprenticeship enrollment significantly. It's re-engaged disconnected young adults and adults to get back into our workforce systems. And so those are some ways that here in the Piedmont Triad, we've been able to address some of that. But I think that holistically, communities are going to have to figure out how to increase awareness of the benefits of those non-traditional careers and how lucrative they are.
So I'm curious, Hillary, if I can quickly pivot to you and recognize we only have a few more minutes in our call, but I think something that Chris just said, that communities are going to have to figure out how to elevate these careers and to highlight them. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the work of the CEO Council.
Sure. I would say that we work closely with Charlotte Works, which is our workforce development board, and they're a really critical partner for us. We've actually spent time trying to design a community-wide workforce development plan. And while alignment around specific hiring and work-based learning goals was difficult to drive across the folks in the region, in our region, looking at the interests of the private sector, government, nonprofits, et cetera, we were able to drive alignment around the industry clusters where we see a lot of opportunity here in Charlotte. And that's really been data-driven, and we've gotten some success around that. So part of that work has helped us lift up, business and technology, which is where fintech sits, healthcare roles, both clinical and non-clinical, and advanced manufacturing and these more specialized construction trades as areas where we see a lot of ability for folks to move into family sustaining wage roles, and we're looking at career pathway development across all those industries. So we're really trying to think about, what is the role that apprenticeship can play there. And I would say for us, some of the things that have been done here in Charlotte, which is not necessarily something that I would own as CELC, but that has really helped drive awareness around some of these jobs, and I know that's been part of the conversation in the chat, has been having the teachers at our school systems and our community colleges have conversations with leaders from industry, especially in talent acquisition and HR, and understand the responsibilities, career pathways, entry point salaries, ability to move up, benefits of some of these jobs. I've participated in some of those as a moderator or even a listener and bystander. And I think that some of that information around, what could you do as a Duke Energy line worker? What opportunities do you have if you get this specialization in welding at, we have this great work-based learning sort of technical program that is sponsored by, CPCC, partnering with Goodwill and the school system to drive a lot of change. And I think it's messaging that folks are just unaware of. And so we've done things like teacher externships and these panels that I think is a great way to get the messaging to the students. But I think there's probably a lot more opportunity to have that conversation directly with students, and maybe even in some cases, more importantly, their parents, so that because this generation, if you look at data, they really rely on parental approval and advice as they make these early career decisions, unlike probably a generation 10 years older. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I wouldn't say we figured it out, but we have started to see some things that are working and moving the needle.
Yeah. And I will say, as a parent of an 18-year-old, I can attest to that. I want to give Nathan the last word on this one in just like 30 seconds, Nathan, if you would. Nathan made a really good point in the chat box that the career awareness gap is as great or greater than the skills gap. And Nathan, I'm wondering if you can just expand on that a little bit, just to close us out.
Well, our region just completed a survey of students in K-12, and we had thousands of responses. And to Hillary's point, the number one place students go for career advice is their parents. And so oftentimes, especially low-income students, they don't see the opportunities that are available in their community. And so, that's why, and I know many across the state are doing career awareness activities, but to open up the doors to let individuals see those opportunities, I think is really critical. And that's where I think registered apprenticeships are so important, because you really do see a pathway. Because we have employers today that they don't have a registered apprenticeship program, that you start at an entry-level job and they will provide you training, and you can start out at $14 or $15 an hour, and in a couple of years, if you're successful, you can be making $25 an hour or more, but they don't see that laid out as a roadmap. So I think that's one of the big benefits for employers when you're trying to develop your talent pipeline. And just, the final thought for employers, just remember, you're not alone. There's a lot of people in your community and your region there to help you. And if we're going to make a difference, we're going to meet the talent needs of our state, registered apprenticeships are a critical part of that.
Thank you, Nathan. That was an excellent way to end our session. So 1,000 thanks to our panelists for joining us today. I wish we were all in person to do this, but thank you for kind of enduring the virtual space with us. Can we move to the next slide? I want to transition now to my colleague, Charlie Milling, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the vision for a regional youth apprenticeship approach to young youth apprenticeships with Alan Fryer and Ann Flint.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlie Milling, and I'm the Western Region Youth Apprenticeship Coordinator with ApprenticeshipNC. And with me today, I have Ann Flint, who is the Director of the Eastern Triad Workforce Initiative and GAP at the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, and Mr. Alan Fryer, who is a PIA Equity Fellow and also Principal of Peregrine Strategies, which is an issue strategy consulting firm. And we wanted to take the next 10 minutes or so and talk to you all about a view of regionalism from within. From within our regions, how does this look? I think we've started to define regionalism and the need. So how can we go about doing that? And for you, we kind of have two different models, if you will, or examples. And regionalism, our approach is based on the 8 prosperity zones within North Carolina. And each region is different. It's different culturally. It's different geographically, economically. So each region's approach is going to be a little bit different. Next slide, please. And then the next one, please. So I'm in charge of the West, or I'm a consultant and help out here in the Western Prosperity Zone. And we are highlighted by only 1 major metropolitan area and 6 community colleges, and a lot of mountains and valleys and a lot of bears. I can't do anything about the bears, but nor the topography. And the topography really does limit, to some degree, the ability for large regional connections, where what it's done instead has created pockets of economic success which has enabled some successful youth apprenticeship programs to get going, as Nathan pointed out. So the question becomes, how do we bring business together? Because really the whole point of this, right, is growth. Participation data shows that the bulk of the participation, both from an apprenticeship and an apprenticeship program perspective, is really concentrated in the middle of the state, in the Triangle, in the Charlotte, in that. And so we want to grow it out. So how do we do that? And out west, it was really driven by the community colleges. It's a more rural perspective, but it works here because, like I said, we have 6 community colleges who are in charge of 2 to 3 counties. They have a really good pulse, a really good sense of what's happening, of what the businesses need, what their strengths are, but what the challenges are as well. And they're really well positioned to be that convener and to be that driver and bring together the K through 12. They already work with K through 12 systems with articulation agreements and other programs, but also the industry in providing workforce. So out west, next slide, please. We needed the community colleges to come together, and they have, and they've done an excellent job of talking to individual businesses and starting to form consortiums and growth in different industries. And so what we want to do moving forward is to create linkages through their work, through the community colleges' work, throughout the region. And we want to synthesize those linkages to form a regional network and a coalition of stakeholders. So essentially, we want to, through the community colleges, we being all of us, industry, business, K through 12, students, parents, we want to get on the same page and come together to grow and grow opportunity. And in doing so, we hope to produce region-wide scalability of programs, region-wide resources for program support, and overall increase in business and industry. And I'm really big on this, and we've said it a couple times. We will create opportunity for youth to stay. I love Charlotte. I love the Triangle. I love visiting. But if a youth who is graduating high school wants to stay and wants to have a viable career and an option, registered youth apprenticeship is an awesome way to do that. So that's one model, more of a rural model. Another one is more of an urban model. Next slide, please, which Ann will talk about.
So hi, I'm so happy to be here. My name is Ann Flint, and I'm the director of the Eastern Triad Workforce Initiative and Guilford Apprenticeship Partners. I work at the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. So our take on this is a little bit different. I represent the Triad region of North Carolina. So the Eastern Triad Workforce Initiative is what it sounds like, a workforce initiative to create a pipeline of skilled workers in our 4-county region of Guilford, Alamance, Randolph, and Rockingham. And through this incentive, this group got together to create, get some funding from the state to create a model that was both scalable and replicable, and to support the current youth apprenticeship programs as well as the workforce development boards for incumbent workers and on-the-job training. So it's kind of it's unique in that, you know, Charlie was talking about his region as being rural, and really the Triad is unique in that it's a combination of rural, urban, and suburban. So even within each of our counties, we have program really comes from our youth apprenticeship programs. GAP is what I work directly with, but I work with the other 3 consortiums in the area. And so GAP started in 2016 at the same time as CAP. We took the model of Apprenticeship 2000 from Siemens Corp, that Roger Collins was talking about, and we got together 6 companies in the advanced manufacturing track, with the help of our chambers in Greensboro and High Point, and along with the Community Foundation, began a small youth apprenticeship program in the area of advanced manufacturing. So this was definitely business-led, helped by the Community Foundation and the chambers. So they set out to recruit these students with the help of the community college system, the K-12 system, ApprenticeshipNC, and of course the employers and the parents working together. So this program really, it's important to note that when this program started out, there was not the tuition waiver that we all talk about. You know, through the strength of our work together, can you switch to the next slide, please? With the help of the chambers and our regional efforts, we were able to get that statewide tuition waiver that people talk about. And that statewide tuition waiver has really helped increase our recruitment of companies. So with that statewide tuition waiver that we mentioned a few times, really what it allows students who are registered in the youth apprenticeship program before they graduate high school to get their tuition paid for by the state. So there's no cost to the employer and there's no cost to the student. As you can imagine, this is a huge game changer. It's really helped increase employers' willingness to sign on our youth. So a big part of this, too, by getting these youth into our program, what it really has helped is, one, getting employers on board, but also getting the youth into these programs, as Charlie mentioned, before they leave our region. You know, the Triad is a great region, but the allure of Charlotte and Raleigh often is exciting. So we don't want to lose our best and our brightest, and also for the companies to develop their own talent. So the consortium and regional efforts have helped align the K-12 school system, the employer needs, the community college, and together we really have put a lot of effort, as mentioned before, into branding and awareness. So this is something that comes up all the time. Parents are a lot more involved, and adults are involved in helping their youth decide on what career pathway, what's next after high school. So a big focus of our funding has continued to be really what these career pathways have to offer and some of the benefits of them. So in addition to this, having these strong youth apprenticeship programs, it's helped the chambers actually recruit companies into our area. So they know they have an established youth apprenticeship program, and also has created the opportunity to have more than just the advanced manufacturing track that's led in our region. Currently, GAP has 5 different sectors of advanced manufacturing, automotive, IT, service technician, as well as supply chain logistics. So through this consortium, we also have regional best practices meetings each quarter, where all the 4 consortiums get together. We invite others as well to share current issues. There's no sense in recreating the wheel. So this has really helped. It also has aligned the apprenticeship coordinators from the 4 different consortiums together. We talk on a regular basis. We have monthly meetings, but we support each other. So, these regional efforts really help us as we move forward and expand our programs. And now, you heard earlier from Chris Rivera, so the Guilford Works now is expanding into apprenticeships as well, because they've seen that, it's a win-win for everyone. And so there's a lot of working parts here, but there's really strength in numbers. So, the Eastern Triad is just an example of what you can do in your region. And like I said, it's, we're not really, people think of us as an urban population, but even within Guilford County, we do have rural populations as well as suburban. So working together, there's a lot of strength in numbers as you move forward. So I'm going to end there and pass it on to Alan, who's going to talk a little bit more moving forward about some of the barriers and some of the things that we've all dealt with.
Well, Charlie, Ann, thanks for the kind introduction. I'm Alan Fryer. I'm the PIA Equity Fellow at New America. And I just thanks to all of you for your hard work on the ground to make this a reality. As Ann said, I wanted to talk with you about the importance of equity, particularly racial equity in youth apprenticeship. And it We really see this issue as cutting across both the urban and rural context that Ann and Charlie just discussed. So folks like to define equity in lots of different ways, but for the purposes of this conversation, I just want to be really simple, relatively straightforward. Equity in youth apprenticeship requires ensuring that everyone has access to these programs and the supports needed to complete them. By the way, could we advance the slides to the next one? There we go. That's great. Thank you. So equity in youth apprenticeship is really critical because we recognize that our state's labor market, like our national labor market, is already not particularly equitable, right? We know from what we experienced in COVID that folks of color, workers of color, are already disproportionately concentrated in these low-wage and now frontline occupations where they're at risk from exposure to COVID. Beyond that, we know that workers of color face an unemployment rate that's almost double the overall unemployment rate, and that women and workers of color are typically paid, you know, about 30 cents on the dollar less than white male workers with the same level of education. So the economy and the labor market isn't terribly equitable. But the hope and the promise of youth apprenticeship is that it can play a role in overcoming these inequities by connecting these young workers to living wage, occupational pathways, and free college right out of high school. So over the long term, we can change these trends. And that's why it's so important that we get youth apprenticeship right, that we address the barriers to equity for apprentices so that they can live up to the program can live up to its promises of making our labor market work for everyone, especially those that are typically left behind. So we recognize that historically marginalized communities and students of color face two broad types of barriers to access and completion in the youth apprenticeship programs. So the first are these barriers that exist for them specifically because of their race or gender. And here, of course, we're talking mostly about race. One example of this involves implicit bias, where apprenticeship gatekeepers like career counselors, the teachers, the employers, don't think apprenticeship is for certain types of people who maybe don't look like them, talk like them, share different cultural values or behaviors, so they don't invite them to apply to apprenticeship programs, or employers don't hire them once they do apply, or there are screening criteria in the application process that disadvantage folks of color because of previous implicit bias around what it takes to succeed. The second type of barriers or category of barriers, and if we want to go to the next slide, that would be good. The second category of barriers that are those that affect everyone but impact marginalized groups disproportionately because of pre-existing disparities rooted in the historical legacies of discrimination. And there are a number of examples, but one that might be surprising in this case, it's a barrier that everyone recognizes, but not necessarily the equity implications of it, is transportation. And that's what we'll talk about right now. The good news is that regionalism is a part of the solution. If you want to go to the next slide. That's great. If you can back up to the previous slide. I'm sorry, that's my fault. There's a little bit of a lag in my machine. So let's talk about transportation, especially in terms of racial equity. Transporting apprentices from home to school to work, community college, and back again is a pervasive challenge for everyone doing youth apprenticeship, particularly those who are living in rural communities or, as Ann described, where there are multiple municipalities or counties that are participating in the apprenticeship programs that run across urban, suburban, and rural areas. So since this is a problem that really affects all apprentices regardless of race, how do we consider this a racial equity problem? And then how can regionalism be used as a solution for it? Well, because of the discriminatory history that's basically generated a massive racial wealth gap racial gap in wealth and income, workers of color are more likely to face barriers to transportation than white apprentices in the same geographies. While many apprentices or their families don't have access to cars or public transit, the burden falls disproportionately on students of color. And there's just a couple sort of data points that the literature has explored in depth, I think that's helpful here. Families of color already are 2 to 3 times less likely to have access to a car than white families. Black students in particular already face commute times to school that are 5 minutes longer than white students. And for Latino students or Hispanic students, that number can get as high as 10 minutes longer. So imagine how this plays out in apprenticeship, where you have to travel not just from home to school, which already takes longer for students of color than for their white peers. but you have to add in those same longer commute times to work and then to community college and then then back to school and then back home, and then throw in that you don't necessarily have a car and you don't know anyone who can regularly lend you their car in a state where mass transit doesn't really get you where you need to go if it exists at all. So it's just going to be a lot harder to complete the program facing these types of barriers. So what can be done? If we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. The good news is that regionalism and regional cooperation is a great antidote for overcoming these barriers. And here are some suggestions that we've seen from around the country. A number of them are actually from Ann's program in the Triad. And so the first is transportation funds for Uber cards, gas cards, and transit passes. And in the Triad, for example, we saw employers chip in nominal amounts of money, really, that went into a fund that provided cards and gas cards and transit passes for their apprentices who wouldn't otherwise have access to a car. And that works regionally as long as all the employers in the region are chipping in. But a step up beyond sort of this employer leadership piece is the lease and purchase of a fleet of vans specifically to transport apprentices, and then basically the creation of a separate transportation system. This has been an example that's been used in other states, in particular in areas that are trying to address the rural transportation gap. There are clearly budget implications, but this is where regionalism can work for you as opposed to against you by having multiple municipalities chip in and contribute as part of their support for apprenticeship program to this fleet. Third option is developing and coordinating carpools. And whether this is done by the intermediary or done by a community college or done by employers, the internet is amazing and it allows significant types of online coordination, but to make sure that workers that are apprentices that are at the same employers and going to the same classes have the ability to travel together. And it's just an organizational challenge that folks can participate in. The fourth option is basically trying to leverage existing public transit options by easing restrictions on public transit supports for apprentices. So in some regions around the country, particularly in urban areas, there's already an extensive public transit system. And there are special subsidies and special allowances for certain types of folks, seniors, military vets, that kind of thing. And the thinking in these places has been you could expand those particular allowances so that registered apprentices and registered youth apprenticeship programs could be eligible for reduced fare or free fare for public transit. So the fifth piece is adopting flexible training formats and schedules at the community college to allow apprentices to minimize the number of trips that they need to take. And this would require significant coordination between the community college and the employers to figure out sort of what kind of schedule works for apprentices. But again, this is the type of cooperation that can happen regionally if you have multiple employers working with the community college to be willing to develop this kind of schedule. The last option is really, it's more about policy, and it's very long-term policy than it is sort of these programmatic fixes. But it's to support regional investments in public transit, including revenue sharing and coordination for regional transit authorities. And I just want to flag this for a moment because this seems probably well outside what most folks working, either employers or community college folks or the intermediaries, the administrators and the intermediaries, would normally think about doing, right? We recognize one, urging local government to make decisions outside the realm of K-12 and post-secondary education is just not something that we typically do. But in this case, it's trying to make the business case, trying to make the economic case, trying to make the workforce case for how regional cooperation in revenue sharing could really help support getting apprentices where they need to go to get the job training that they need and successfully complete the programs that they need, which in turn obviously benefits the employers. So those are 6 policy options. These were recently found. I recently put these into a blog post that went up at the New America site. I can send a link to that. And there are more, I'm sure. But in these cases, what the bottom line here that I want to be able to share is just that to the extent that we're able to use regional solutions to address these problems, they will disproportionately help marginalized communities, people of color, who are disproportionately negatively impacted by the lack of transportation options. So this is a big step forward in ensuring equity in the youth apprenticeship program and overcoming the transportation barriers that may hold people back. So we're just scratching the surface here, but we did, but as a resource I just want to offer, we did recently release a report last year with a couple other authors, Pam Howes, who some of you might know, Allison Forbes, that provided an exhaustive list of equity-related barriers and strategies to overcome them. I can put that link in the chat, and it should be helpful. I would say the report is lengthy. It's exhaustive. It's probably more exhaustive than you'd want to read. But the executive summary is short and tight and has a very helpful chart. So I would commend that to you all, and I hope it benefits you in the work that you're doing.
And thank you, Alan. I really appreciate that. So we are really running up against time. So I just want to transition it very quickly to my colleague Elizabeth, who will close us out. And my colleague Jonathan is going to actually post a link to the self-assessment tool into the chat box. And that self-assessment tool is something that's been created by JFF in partnership with PAYA to help communities actually do a little bit of a SWOT analysis on where they're situated in their system and program with youth apprenticeships. Elizabeth, I'll transition it to you.
Thank you, Andrea, Jonathan, and all of our panelists and everyone who attended today and helped us to make this event successful. The next 30 minutes, the last portion of this event, is the most important part of our accelerator event today, because the power of your region lies in the opportunities like these, where leaders across sectors have a space to share ideas and set goals, to build a network of support that addresses local needs. This is where funding opportunities are generated and where policy is developed, like what we've heard about today. So for the next half hour, you have been strategically set to join your region, to come together and be with the practitioners who have been leading in the apprenticeship space in your region, and to join new and interested partners to build regional capacity and opportunity for training and retaining bright talent in your regions. So thank you for your support of youth and young adult apprenticeship. Be on the lookout for an invite to our next NC PAYA Accelerator event, which will be hosted by ACT on February 17th. So now it's time for us to hear from Rachel Crowfoot about how to break out into our regional sessions. And again, thank you so much to everyone today for your attendance and your participation.